August 8, 1940. The sun rose reluctantly over southern England, a pale, hesitant light filtering through the morning mist. Londoners went about their day, unaware that the sky above would soon become a battlefield unlike any they had known. On the horizon, dark silhouettes of Luftwaffe aircraft were already crossing the Channel, hundreds of miles of steel and fire, their engines cutting through the dawn. In a small airfield outside of Biggin Hill, Flight Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Hawthorne ran his hands along the polished fuselage of his Hawker Hurricane. The plane gleamed under the morning sun, yet it was more than metal. It was the only shield standing between his homeland and an invading force that seemed unstoppable. His squadron gathered around, a mix of youth and grit, faces pale with anticipation and determination. None spoke much. The weight of what lay ahead silenced all but the hum of engines and the distant cry of gulls. Jimmy's thoughts raced back to the early days of the Blitz. He had seen the destruction wrought by German bombers, homes reduced to rubble, streets filled with smoke and screams. Yet here he was, preparing for another day of aerial duels, acutely aware that every sortie could be his last. Nearby, Pilot Officer Claire Benson checked her Spitfire's instruments. A rare female pilot in a male-dominated force, Claire had earned her wings through determination and skill. She was calm on the surface, but beneath that composed exterior was a heart pounding with anticipation. Today, she would join her squadron over the skies of Dover, engaging in a dance of life and death that demanded both courage and precision. By 9:15 a.m., the first wave of Luftwaffe bombers approached the coast. Radar stations had reported their coordinates hours earlier, but the sheer scale of the incoming force was staggering. German pilots, confident and trained, had already penetrated much of Europe's defenses. Their intelligence suggested Britain would crumble under sustained bombardment. But the RAF had other plans. Fighter Command had devised a strategy that seemed audacious: intercept the enemy early, disrupt formations, and force them into tactical errors. Every pilot knew the stakes. Every man and woman understood that failure meant not just personal death, but the potential fall of a nation. Jimmy and his squadron climbed into the clouds, engines roaring in unison. The air was thick with tension, each man scanning the sky for the first glimpse of enemy planes. Hours stretched as they navigated the churning currents above the Channel, the hum of engines masking the terror that gripped their hearts. Then suddenly, through the mist, the silhouettes appeared. Hundreds of Messerschmitts, flying in tight formation, bombs slung beneath their wings. The battle began instantly. Tracers cut through the sky like fiery threads. Hurricanes and Spitfires wove among the German aircraft, trading fire, executing evasive maneuvers, and relying on both instinct and training. Jimmy's hands were steady on the controls, but his mind raced. Every shot fired, every maneuver executed, carried consequences that could be fatal. Below them, the English Channel shimmered deceptively calm, a stark contrast to the chaos overhead. Pilots would later recall the dissonance, the serene beauty of the sea against the thunder of war overhead. It was a reminder that while technology and strategy defined the battle, human courage and decision-making determined its outcome. The Luftwaffe underestimated the RAF's resilience. Miscommunication, overconfidence, and the sheer audacity of British pilots disrupted German formations. Claire, diving from a higher altitude, took a calculated risk to target a bomber carrying critical munitions. Her shot found its mark, sending the aircraft into a spiraling descent. The roar of its engines faded into the clouds, leaving a trail of smoke like a dark brushstroke across the sky. Moments like this defined the miracle of Britain's skies. Ordinary men and women, in machines that were often outnumbered and sometimes outmatched, held the line against an invading force that had conquered much of Europe. Each engagement was a high-stakes gamble, a test of skill, nerve, and unyielding commitment to duty. As the day progressed, waves of enemy aircraft came and went. Pilots grew weary, muscles straining, eyes burning, yet they pressed on. Jimmy dodged cannon fire, maneuvered through tight formations, and executed split-second decisions that would determine life or death. The camaraderie within the squadron was palpable. Every pilot relied on the other's judgment, trust forged in the crucible of battle. By late afternoon, the Luftwaffe began to retreat, their formations fragmented, many aircraft damaged or lost. Britain's skies, though scarred, remained under Allied control. The miracle was not in the absence of destruction, but in the perseverance of those who refused to yield. Back on the airfield, pilots returned exhausted but alive. Engines shut down, hands trembling, hearts still racing. Jimmy looked around at his comrades, some faces marked with soot, sweat, and fear, others calm, almost serene in their survival. Each knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, the indomitable spirit of the RAF, standing firm when all odds suggested they should fall. The news soon reached London. Civilians previously paralyzed by fear found hope in reports of the RAF's daring actions. Newspapers celebrated the pilots as heroes, radio broadcasts relayed their bravery, and for the first time in weeks, the people of Britain dared to believe that victory was possible. Yet, for the pilots, the day was not about glory. It was about survival, strategy, and the quiet, unspoken understanding that every sortie could be their last. The miracle of Britain's skies was born not from magic, but from preparation, courage, and the unyielding commitment of ordinary individuals placed in extraordinary circumstances. Even decades later, historians would marvel at that period, how a small island nation, under relentless attack, managed to hold its skies against a technologically formidable foe. They would analyze tactics, pilot training, and strategic innovations, but at the heart of the miracle lay the human element, the young men and women who climbed into fragile machines, looked death in the face, and chose to fight anyway. And so Section 1 closes with tension unresolved, the battle raging across the clouds, and the story set, the RAF's pilots defying all odds, ready to carve their names into history. The miracle of Britain's skies had begun, and the world would never forget the courage displayed in those perilous days. Defending the sky, securing hope. August 15, 1940. The dawn was gray, thick clouds hanging low over southern England, obscuring the rising sun. Yet through this gloom, the rumble of engines heralded the next wave of Luftwaffe bombers crossing the Channel. The Battle of Britain was no longer an abstract concept. It was a visceral reality, a contest of skill, courage, and endurance in the skies above the British Isles. Flight Lieutenant James Hawthorne tightened his grip on the control column of his Hurricane. Beside him, Pilot Officer Claire Benson adjusted her goggles, scanning the murky horizon for any sign of enemy formation. Radio chatter crackled with updates, coordinates, and urgent commands. Every moment carried a weight measured in lives, cities, and the fragile morale of a nation. The first German formations appeared as dark specks through the clouds. Messerschmitts, Dornier bombers, and Junkers aircraft sliced through the gray sky, engines roaring, bombs strapped beneath wings, confidence in every maneuver. But the RAF was ready. Fighter Command had anticipated their approach, and squadrons were strategically positioned to intercept, disrupt, and protect key targets. Jimmy and Claire dove into the fray, weaving through tracers and enemy fire. Hurricanes and Spitfires danced in a deadly ballet, engines screaming, guns blazing. Every pilot had to make split-second decisions to attack, evade, or protect their comrades. The skill required was immense, the margin for error microscopic. Below, the English countryside shimmered deceptively calm, contrasting the chaos above. Villages and towns could be obliterated in moments, and civilians were already bracing for the inevitable bombings. Yet the pilots pressed on, their courage anchoring the hopes of millions. Jimmy targeted a formation of bombers heading for a critical radar installation. He lined up his guns, taking a deep breath, and fired. The tracer rounds ripped through the air, igniting one of the bombers. It spiraled downward, smoke trailing, engines screaming as it fell into a deserted field. Claire, nearby, engaged a second bomber, her precision impeccable, guiding the aircraft toward the channel to minimize collateral damage. Every engagement was a high-stakes gamble. Hurricanes were outnumbered, often outgunned, yet their maneuverability and the pilots' training allowed them to exploit weaknesses in the German formations. Communication, trust, and instinct were as critical as ammunition. Hours passed and fatigue set in. Sweat stung the pilots' eyes, muscles burned from relentless maneuvers, yet they remained vigilant. Every wave of enemy aircraft brought new challenges: machine gun fire, exploding bombs, and the psychological strain of sustained combat. Meanwhile, Claire spotted a bomber aiming for a vital water treatment facility. She executed a daring vertical climb, positioning her Spitfire above the target. With calculated fire, she disabled the bomber's engines, sending it crashing safely into a field away from civilians. Her squadron mates covered her escape, demonstrating the coordination and trust that defined RAF tactics. Across the channel, Luftwaffe commanders were stunned. Their reconnaissance had underestimated British radar efficiency, the skill of the pilots, and the resilience of fighter command. Miscommunication and overconfidence now cost them dearly. Squadrons fragmented, bombs fell harmlessly, and the morale of German air crews began to waver. By late afternoon, exhausted pilots began to regroup. Hurricanes and Spitfires had suffered losses, but the sky remained firmly under Allied control. The RAF had held its ground not through superior numbers, but through determination, strategy, and the extraordinary courage of individuals like Jimmy and Claire. Back on the airfields, pilots returned battered but triumphant. Mechanics rushed to inspect and repair planes, medics tended to minor injuries, and commanding officers debriefed each sortie meticulously. The pilots' tales were remarkable, acts of bravery, split-second heroics, and moral resolve under fire. News reached London, where civilians, previously paralyzed by fear, erupted in relief and admiration. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and whispered conversations painted a picture of a miracle in the skies, ordinary men and women standing against an overwhelming foe, refusing to yield. Historians later analyzed the battle in detail. They noted the importance of radar, the ingenuity of fighter command strategies, and the relentless courage of pilots. The miracle of Britain's skies was not mere happenstance, it was the product of preparation, innovation, and human resilience. Jimmy and Claire, like many of their comrades, carried the emotional weight of the battle long after the guns fell silent. They grappled with the loss of friends, the destruction witnessed, and the moral responsibility of decisions made in life-and-death situations. Yet they also bore pride, knowing that their actions preserved not only lives, but the very freedom of their nation. As evening fell on August 15, 1940, the skies over Britain were quiet, the sun dipping below the horizon. Pilots returned to their airfields, weary but unbroken. The day had been won, but the war was far from over. Still, the miracle of Britain's skies had proven that courage, strategy, and determination could defy the odds, leaving an indelible mark on history.